How Jesus draws near when your faith feels weak. You prayed and nothing moved. You believed and still felt empty. You tried to stay strong, to keep saying the right words, to hold on to something that once felt alive inside you, but now feels distant and fragile. And somewhere in that quiet struggle, a question began to rise, slowly, heavily, almost painfully. Where is Jesus in this moment? Because if he is near, why does it feel like you are speaking into silence? Why does it seem like your words fall before they ever reach him? You expected comfort, you expected clarity, you expected some kind of response, but instead you found yourself standing in a space where nothing seems to answer back. And this is where the tension begins to grow. Not outside of you, but inside. You start examining yourself. Maybe I am not praying right. Maybe my faith is too weak. Maybe I have done something wrong. And without even noticing, the silence begins to reshape how you see God. It starts to feel like distance. But listen carefully, because this changes everything. Silence has never been proof of absence. It only feels that way when you measure God through your emotions instead of his nature. What you feel is real, but it is not always true. There is a moment recorded in Scripture that most people read too quickly. In Matthew chapter 27, verse 46, Jesus cries out, my God, why have you forsaken me?" That was not a moment where God had abandoned him. That was the moment where the greatest act of closeness was unfolding, hidden beneath pain, hidden beneath what felt like separation. So what if what you are feeling right now is not distance at all? What if your weakest moment is not where Jesus steps away, but where he draws closer in a way you have not yet learned to recognize? Because the truth is, Jesus does not wait for perfect faith. He does not move toward strength that pretends. He moves toward what is real. And sometimes the most real thing you have is a tired heart that is still trying to reach him, even when it feels like nothing is reaching back. And if you stay here for a moment, if you do not run from this silence, you might begin to discover something unexpected, that Jesus has been closer in your weakness than you ever felt in your strength. When silence feels like distance. There is a kind of silence that does not just surround you, it settles deep inside you. It makes your prayers feel like they vanish before they form. You open your mouth, but the words feel heavy. You try to believe, but your thoughts feel scattered. And the longer that silence stays, the more it begins to shape what you think is true. At first you call it a season, then you call it a struggle, but eventually you start calling it distance. You begin to believe that God has stepped back, that he is watching from far away, that something about you has created a gap that you cannot close. And this is where the weight becomes personal. You stop just feeling silence, you start blaming yourself for it. You wonder if your faith is too weak to hold his attention. You question whether your past has disqualified you. You look at others who seem full of certainty, and you feel like you are the only one standing in this quiet, uncertain place. But silence has a subtle way of distorting reality. It takes what you feel and slowly turns it into what you believe. It convinces you that if you cannot sense God, then he must not be near. It trains your heart to depend on feelings instead of truth. Yet if you look deeper, silence in Scripture has never meant absence. It has often been the place where God is doing his most hidden work. Not the kind that announces itself, not the kind that gives immediate answers, but the kind that reshapes you from within. Think about the moments where nothing seemed to happen on the surface. Those are often the moments where something was forming underneath. Like a seed buried in the ground, unseen, unnoticed, yet breaking open in ways that cannot be measured yet. The silence is not empty, it is active, and this is where your perspective begins to shift. What if the silence you fear is not a sign that Jesus has stepped away, but a space where he is working without noise? What if he is not responding in the way you expected, because he is doing something deeper than what you asked for? Because Jesus is not drawn to the volume of your faith. He is drawn to your need, even when that need is quiet, even when it feels broken, even when all you have left is a whisper that barely forms into a prayer. You may not feel him, but feeling has never been the measure of his presence. You may not hear him, but silence has never limited his nearness. The truth is, he can be closest when you feel the least aware of him. So before you decide that this silence means he is distant, pause for a moment. Let the question change. Instead of asking why he is not speaking, ask what he might be doing beneath the surface, because the silence that feels like distance may be the very place where Jesus is drawing nearer than you ever imagined. The moment faith stops performing, there comes a moment when you can no longer pretend, not because you do not want to believe, but because something inside you is too tired to keep performing. The words you used to say with confidence now feel heavy. The certainty you once carried now feels distant, and suddenly you are left with something raw, something unpolished, something real. For a long time, you may not even realize that your faith had become a performance. You learned how to say the right things, how to sound strong, how to convince others and even yourself that everything was steady inside. You knew how to declare, how to repeat, how to hold the image of someone who never wavers. But beneath that there was pressure, the pressure to maintain strength, the pressure to not show doubt, the pressure to believe that if you were not strong enough, something would be lost. And then life happens in a way that strips all of that away, not gently, but completely. Suddenly, the strength you relied on is no longer there. The words do not come as easily. The confidence feels forced. And what remains is not impressive. It is honest. This is the moment many people fear, because it feels like failure. It feels like something is breaking that should have stayed intact. It feels like you are becoming less than what you were supposed to be. But what if this is not the collapse of your faith, but the release of something false? Because faith was never meant to be sustained by performance. It was never meant to depend on how well you could maintain the image of strength. Real faith begins where performance ends, where you stop trying to appear strong and start being honest about where you actually are. There is a reason why Jesus responded to people who came to him without pretense. Those who did not hide their struggle, those who did not mask their doubt, those who simply came as they were, not polished, not perfect, just real. When you reach the point where you can no longer pretend, you are not moving away from Jesus. You are stepping into the kind of honesty that draws him near, because he is not looking for a performance. He is looking for truth. And truth does not always sound confident. Sometimes it sounds like a quiet admission. Sometimes it sounds like, I do not know how to believe right now. Sometimes it sounds like I am trying, but I feel weak. That kind of faith does not impress people, but it reaches God in a way that performance never could. Because it is no longer built on appearance, it is built on dependence. So if you find yourself in this place where the performance has stopped, do not mistake it for loss. This is where something deeper begins. This is where your faith becomes real, not because it feels strong, but because it refuses to hide. And what comes next may challenge everything you thought faith was supposed to look like. Why weak faith is more honest than strong words. There is something disarming about weak faith. It does not try to sound impressive. It does not attempt to convince anyone. It does not hide behind perfect language or confident declarations. It simply reveals what is truly happening inside. Strong words can be powerful, but they can also become a shield, a way to avoid facing what is actually going on beneath the surface. You can say all the right things and still feel completely disconnected inside. You can declare belief and still carry doubt that you never allow yourself to acknowledge. And this is where many people get trapped. They begin to measure their faith by how strong it sounds, not by how real it is. They learn to speak with certainty, even when their heart feels uncertain. They build a version of faith that looks solid on the outside but is fragile underneath. But weak faith does something different. It does not pretend. It does not hide. It comes as it is, even when it trembles, even when it questions, even when it struggles to hold on. And that honesty is not something Jesus rejects. It is something he responds to. There is a moment in Mark chapter 9, verse 24, where a man says something that most people would be afraid to admit. He says, "I believe, help my unbelief." That is not a polished statement. It is not strong in the way people expect faith to be strong. It is divided, it is conflicted, it is real. And Jesus does not turn away from that. He moves toward it, because weak faith is still reaching. It may not feel steady, but it is still turning toward him. It may not feel confident, but it is still refusing to walk away. And that matters more than the strength of your words. What you are willing to bring to Jesus matters more than how it sounds. You do not need to filter your doubts before you come to him. You do not need to strengthen your belief before you reach out. You come as you are, not as you think you should be. And this is where something shifts. When you stop trying to sound strong and start being honest, your faith stops being about control and starts becoming about trust. Not trust in your ability to believe perfectly, but trust in his willingness to meet you even in your imperfection. So if your faith feels weak, if your words feel uncertain, if your heart feels divided, do not assume that you are far from him. You may be closer than you have ever been, because you are finally standing before him without anything to hide. And what you discover next may change how you understand your struggle entirely, the hidden language of spiritual exhaustion. There is a kind of exhaustion that goes deeper than your body. It settles into your thoughts, into your emotions, into your spirit. You wake up tired, not just physically, but internally, and even the idea of praying feels heavy, like something you no longer have the strength to do the way you used to. You try to form the words, but they feel distant. You try to focus, but your mind drifts. You try to feel something, but there is just a quiet emptiness. And slowly, you begin to believe that this exhaustion is a sign that something is wrong with your faith. But what if this exhaustion is not failure? What if it is speaking a language you have not yet learned to understand? Because there are moments when your spirit is so worn, so stretched, so drained, that it cannot express itself in structured prayers or confident thoughts. And in those moments, your silence, your sighs, even your inability to speak begin to say more than words ever could. Scripture reveals something most people overlook. In Romans chapter 8, verse 26, it says that when we do not know what to pray, the Spirit himself intercedes with groanings too deep for words. That means there are moments where your weakness becomes the very place where heaven begins to speak on your behalf. Your exhaustion is not invisible to God. It is not ignored. It is not dismissed. It is understood completely. What you call weakness, he recognizes as depth. What you call emptiness, he sees as a space where something sacred is happening beyond your awareness. Because when you are strong, you tend to rely on your ability to express. But when you are exhausted, you are forced into a different kind of connection. One that is not built on words, not built on effort, but built on presence. And presence does not require energy. It does not require perfect thoughts. It does not require emotional strength. It only requires that you remain. So even if all you can do is sit in silence, even if all you feel is tired, even if your prayers feel incomplete, something deeper is happening. Something you cannot measure, something you cannot control, something that does not depend on how strong you feel. God is not waiting for you to recover your strength before he listens. He's already near in the middle of your exhaustion, understanding what you cannot explain, receiving what you cannot express. And if you stay in this moment without running from it, you may begin to realize something unexpected, that your exhaustion is not pushing him away. It is drawing him closer in a way that strength never could. where Jesus stands when you feel like you're failing. There is a moment that no one prepares you for. The moment when you feel like you are not just struggling, but failing. Not becoming who you thought you would be, not holding the faith you believed you had, not standing as strong as you promised yourself you would. And in that moment, something inside you begins to pull back. You start to create distance, not because God moved, but because you assume He did. You imagine Him standing far away, watching, disappointed, waiting for you to fix yourself before you come any closer. This is the image many carry without realizing it. A Jesus who steps back when you fall short. A Savior who waits at a distance until you become stronger, cleaner, more certain. But that image is not real. Because when you look closely at how Jesus actually responds, you see a completely different pattern. He does not move away from weakness. He moves toward it. He does not create space when people fail. He closes the distance. Think about the moments when people were at their lowest, when they were uncertain, broken, exposed. Those were the exact moments where Jesus stepped closer, not further. There is a moment after Peter denied Him, after fear took over and failure became undeniable. In John chapter 21, verse 15 to 17, Jesus does not confront Peter with distance. He meets him by a fire, speaks to him directly, restores him gently. He does not stand far away, waiting for Peter to prove himself. He comes near and rebuilds him where he broke. This is where your understanding begins to shift. Jesus is not standing on the other side of your failure. He is standing in the middle of it, closer than you expect, not to condemn you, but to meet you there. And yet, the hardest part is believing that. Because failure makes you want to hide. It makes you want to withdraw. It makes you feel like you need to fix yourself before you can be seen again. But Jesus does not wait for you to become better before He draws near. He meets you as you are, not as you wish you were. So if you feel like you are failing, if you feel like you are not enough, if you feel like your faith is not holding together the way it should, do not step back. That instinct to withdraw is the very thing that keeps you from seeing where He truly stands. He's not far, He is not distant, He's not waiting for you to get it right. He is already near, standing in the place you thought He would never come, waiting not for your strength, but for your honesty. And what you will discover next may challenge how you see the space between your doubt and your belief. The sacred space between doubt and trust. There is a place that feels uncomfortable, unstable, almost confusing. It is the place where you are not fully certain, but you have not walked away. Where questions rise, but something in you still reaches. Where doubt whispers, but trust refuses to disappear completely. Most people try to escape this space as quickly as possible. They believe they must choose one side, either be full of faith or admit they have none. Either stand strong or fall away. But what if this in-between place is not something to fear, but something sacred? Because this is where something real begins to form. Doubt does not always mean absence of faith. Sometimes it is the tension that proves your faith is still alive. If you did not care, you would not question. If something in you was not still holding on, you would not feel this internal pull. This space between doubt and trust is where you stop relying on certainty and begin learning what it means to depend. Not on what you feel, not on what you can explain, but on who Jesus is, even when you do not fully understand what He is doing. There is a moment in Matthew chapter 14, verse 30 to 31, where Peter steps out onto the water. For a brief moment, he walks. Then fear rises, doubt enters, and he begins to sink. But notice what happens next. Jesus does not wait for Peter to regain perfect faith. He reaches out immediately and takes hold of him. Peter was not standing in perfect trust. He was in the middle of doubt and fear, and that is exactly where Jesus met him. This changes how you see your own struggle. You do not have to eliminate every doubt before Jesus responds to you. You do not have to arrive at perfect clarity before he reaches for you. He meets you in the tension, in the uncertainty, in the very place where you feel divided. So instead of running from this space, stay in it for a moment. Let yourself be honest about what you feel, but do not let go of the part of you that is still reaching. Because that reach, even if it feels small, even if it feels unstable, is enough. And here is the deeper truth. Trust is not the absence of doubt. It is the decision to keep turning toward Jesus even when doubt is present. So if you find yourself in this space, do not assume you are lost. You are standing in a place where something deeper is being formed, something that is not built on easy certainty, but on a connection that holds even when you feel unsure. And what you may begin to notice next is that Jesus does not always change your feelings as quickly as you expect. Why God doesn't rush to fix your feelings. There is a quiet frustration that builds when nothing changes inside you. You pray, you wait, you hope for relief, but the feelings remain the same. The heaviness stays, the uncertainty lingers, and you begin to wonder why God is not stepping in to fix what you are feeling. Because if he is near, why does the weight not lift? If he hears you, why does peace not come instantly? This is where expectations begin to clash with reality. Many believe that God's presence should immediately change how they feel, that if he is close, the anxiety should disappear, the doubt should fade, the strength should return. But that is not always how he works. God is not committed to quick relief. He is committed to something deeper. If he rushed to fix every feeling, you might feel better for a moment, but nothing within you would truly change. You would depend on emotional shifts instead of learning to trust his presence beyond what you feel. There is a moment in Luke chapter 24, verse 15 to 16, where two disciples are walking, overwhelmed, confused, trying to make sense of everything that just happened. Jesus comes near and walks with them, but they do not recognize him. He is there, present, listening, guiding, yet their feelings do not immediately change. He does not rush to reveal himself. He stays with them in their confusion. This reveals something powerful. God's nearness is not always designed to remove your feelings instantly. Sometimes it is meant to sustain you while those feelings remain, to walk with you through them instead of taking you out of them. Because if your faith depends only on how quickly your feelings change, it will always rise and fall with your emotions. But when you begin to recognize his presence, even when nothing shifts inside you, your faith becomes rooted in something deeper. So when the weight does not lift right away, it does not mean God is absent. It means he is working in a way that is not centered on your immediate comfort, but on your long-term transformation. He is teaching you to stay, to trust, to remain, even when everything inside you is asking for escape. And this is where something unexpected begins to form. Not a sudden burst of strength, but a quiet endurance that was not there before. The unexpected strength hidden inside weakness. There is a kind of strength that does not look like strength at all. It does not announce itself. It does not feel powerful. In fact, it often feels like the opposite. It feels like you are barely holding on, like everything inside you is fragile, like one more moment could be too much. And yet this is where a different kind of strength begins to form. Not the kind that comes from confidence, not the kind that depends on certainty, but the kind that grows quietly when you have nothing left to rely on except Jesus. Because as long as you feel strong, it is easy to trust in your own ability to endure. It is easy to believe that you are the one holding everything together. But when weakness becomes undeniable, when you can no longer depend on yourself the way you used to, something shifts. You begin to lean in a way you never did before. This is what is revealed in 2 Corinthians chapter 12, verse 9, where it says that his power is made perfect in weakness, not in strength, not in control, not in the moments where everything feels stable, but in the places where you feel most exposed. Weakness removes the illusion that you are in control. It strips away the idea that you can manage everything on your own. And in that space, something deeper begins to take root. A dependence that is not forced, but necessary. And here is what makes this difficult to recognize. This kind of strength does not feel like victory. It feels like survival. It feels like choosing to stay when leaving would be easier. It feels like continuing to reach, even when you feel nothing in return. But that is strength. The decision to remain when everything inside you feels uncertain. The quiet refusal to walk away. The willingness to keep turning toward Jesus, not because it feels powerful, but because you have nowhere else to go. This strength does not come from you. It grows in the space where you realize you cannot carry yourself anymore. So if you feel weak, if you feel like you are not enough, if you feel like your faith is barely holding together, do not dismiss that as failure. There is something forming in you that could not exist any other way, a strength that is not loud, not visible, not dependent on feelings, but rooted in something far deeper. And what you may begin to see next is that Jesus often reveals himself in ways you were not expecting at all. Recognizing God in what you didn't expect. There is a reason you keep missing him. Not because he is not there, but because you are looking for him in the wrong places. You expect something obvious, something unmistakable, a clear answer, a strong feeling, a moment that removes all doubt. You expect God to show up in a way that matches your idea of how he should move. But what if his nearness rarely looks like what you imagined? Because most of the time, Jesus does not reveal himself through what is loud. He reveals himself through what is easily overlooked, through moments that feel ordinary, through shifts that feel small, through things you almost dismiss because they do not match your expectations. There is a moment in 1 Kings chapter 19, verse 11 to 12, where Elijah is waiting for God. A powerful wind passes by, but God is not in it. An earthquake follows, but God is not in that either. Then a fire comes, and still God is not there. Finally, there is a still, small voice, and that is where God is, not in what was dramatic, but in what was quiet. This is where many miss him. They are waiting for something big, something undeniable, something that forces them to believe. But Jesus often comes in a way that requires attention, not reaction. He shows up in the strength you did not think you had when you needed it most. In the moment you almost gave up but did not. In the quiet thought that told you to keep going when everything else said, stop. He is present in the way you are still here, still searching, still listening, even when you feel like you have nothing left. But if you only look for him in what is obvious, you will overlook what is real. So shift your attention, not toward what you expected, but toward what is actually happening. Toward the subtle, the quiet, the unnoticed. Because Jesus does not always announce his presence. Sometimes he waits for you to recognize it. And once you begin to see him in what you did not expect, you will realize something that changes everything. That he has been near this entire time, just not in the way you were looking for. Holding on when you have nothing left to give. There comes a point where you realize you have no strength left to offer. Not emotionally, not mentally, not even spiritually, in the way you are used to. You are not fighting anymore, not striving, not even trying to feel something. You are simply there, still present, but empty. And this is the moment that feels the most dangerous. Because when you have nothing left to give, it feels like you have nothing left that matters. It feels like your faith has reached its limit, like you are standing at the edge of something that could either hold you or let you fall. But this is where something profound begins to unfold. Faith is not measured by how much you can give. It is revealed in what you choose to do when you have nothing left to offer. When there is no energy, no motivation, no emotional drive, and yet you remain. Remaining becomes the act of faith. There is a moment in John chapter 6, verse 67 to 68, where many begin to walk away. The path becomes too difficult, the understanding too complex, the expectations too heavy. And Jesus turns to his disciples and asks if they will leave as well. Peter answers with something simple, something raw. "Lord, to whom shall we go? You have the words of eternal life." That is not a statement of overflowing strength. It is a recognition of reality. There is nowhere else to go. And sometimes that is all faith looks like. Not a powerful declaration, not a strong emotion, but a quiet decision to stay, to not walk away, to not disconnect, to not abandon what you still, even faintly, believe is true. Holding on when you feel strong is easy. Holding on when you feel nothing is where faith becomes real, because in that moment you are no longer driven by feeling. You are anchored by something deeper, something that does not depend on your strength, but on his. So if you feel like you have nothing left to give, understand this. You are not at the end of your faith. You are at the place where it becomes most genuine. You are still here, still listening, still holding on, even if it feels like the weakest grip imaginable. And that is enough, because what you will soon realize is that even when your grip feels weak, his has never loosened. You were never as far as you felt. There is something you need to hear clearly, not as an idea, not as a concept, but as truth that reaches you where you are right now. You were never as far as you felt. The distance you sensed, the silence you carried, the weight that made everything feel disconnected, none of it was proof that Jesus stepped away. It only felt that way because your emotions became louder than what was actually true. You measured his presence by what you could feel, and when the feeling disappeared, it seemed like he did too. But his nearness has never depended on your awareness of it. There is a moment in Luke chapter 24, verse 31, where the eyes of the disciples are opened, and suddenly they recognize Jesus, who had been walking with them the entire time. He was not absent. He was unrecognized. And that is what has been happening. You thought you were alone, but he was there. You thought he was silent, but he was listening. You thought your weakness created distance, but it became the very place he chose to draw near. Because Jesus does not move away from fragile faith. He moves toward it. He does not require you to feel strong to stay close to you. He stays close because that is who he is. So all those moments you questioned, all those times you felt empty, all those prayers that seemed unanswered, they were never happening in isolation. He was present in ways you did not yet understand. And now something shifts. Not because everything suddenly feels different, but because you begin to see differently. You begin to understand that his presence is not proven by what you feel, but by what remains true even when you feel nothing. You are still here, still seeking, still listening. And that alone is evidence that something deeper has been holding you all along. You did not hold on to him by your strength. He held on to you through your weakness. So stop measuring your closeness to Jesus by your emotions. Stop believing that silence means distance. Stop assuming that weakness pushes him away. He has been near this entire time, closer than your doubts, closer than your fears, closer than the silence that made you question everything. And even now, in this very moment, he is not waiting for you to become stronger. He is already with you, exactly where you are.